Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. On this week's video, we're continuing with our new series entitled The New Era Face-to-Face Evaluation, and this is session 3 in our new series. And just to reiterate some of what we've talked about in our prior sessions, the purpose of this new series is to share with you some ideas on how to change your face-to-face evaluation and basically your evaluation in general with your injured worker. And the necessity for these changes stems from the Division of Workers' Compensation's new interpretation of the complexity factors under CCR 9795. And with the Division of Workers' Compensation's new interpretation and the changes that have following this new interpretation, the changes that have followed in the medical legal fee schedule, and the changes that have resulted in doctors' reimbursements for their evaluations necessitate some changes. In other words, the new interpretation of the complexity factors by the Division of Workers' Compensation has drastically slashed QME reimbursements for their evaluations. And by my calculations from my own cases and also from cases that are reported to me from my subscribers, QME evaluation reports are coming in at somewhere between 60 and 80% less than under the former interpretation of the complexity factors under CCR 9795. So in even still other words, qualified medical evaluators are taking 60 to 80% cuts in pay for their QME evaluation reports. Now, with this now known, do you think that the Division of Workers' Compensation intends for us to continue to do our evaluations in the way that we formerly did when we were getting paid for the entirety and for all activities involved in our evaluation? Do you think the Division of Workers' Compensation intends for us to give hours and hours and hours of time away and write off hundreds and even thousands of dollars in performing our QME evaluations? Do you think that that's the intention of the Division of Workers' Compensation? Well, in my opinion, it's that it's the intent of the Division of Workers' Compensation to cause broad changes in the ways that we evaluate injured workers. Broad changes in the way we approach our cases, broad changes in the way we approach our face-to-face evaluation, broad changes in the ways that we perform our physical examinations, and broad changes in the way that we produce our QME reports. And in sum and substance and in summary, those broad changes require that we significantly shorten, streamline, focus, direct, and target our evaluations into a much more succinct and a much more terse product. How else can qualified medical evaluators preserve their hourly rate and continue to be able to afford to continue as a qualified medical evaluator? In order to continue as a qualified medical evaluator, the entire process has to become much more streamlined and much more succinct. And that process begins with the face-to-face evaluation. So in session 1 of this series, we talked about how to establish the complexity and how to determine the type of evaluation in advance so that when you get to the face-to-face evaluation, you're focused and targeted and you don't spend a single unnecessary moment for which you're not going to get paid. And this makes sense. In our second session, we started to get into the face-to-face evaluation, and we talked about how to communicate with the examinee in such a way that the examinee is relaxed, that the examinee is comfortable, and that the examinee is with you in your purpose of quickly getting to the bottom line in the evaluation so that you both can get in, get out, get it done, and get on with your busy lives and not waste time and not waste money. So that was a fascinating session. And also the purpose of that session was to help you comply with requirements as they're described in the QME regulations as to how we perform our qualified medical evaluations. So I provided several great suggestions, all of which are required by law in our last discussion. So if you did not have a chance to review our last discussion, I strongly recommend that you go back and review it at least one time. Now, in today's discussion, we're continuing with the face-to-face evaluation, and I want to share with you some invaluable ideas as to how to quickly assess your examinee's credibility in the very first few moments of the face-to-face evaluation. Now, by law, and I think it's California Code of Regulations 41 through 49, I could be incorrect, but I think those are the laws that govern the time required for the face-to-face evaluation. Now, for those of you that are watching this video, most of you are involved in neuromusculoskeletal evaluations. Well, according to the law, the minimum time required in the face-to-face evaluation for a neuromusculoskeletal evaluation is 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes. Now, if you have an examinee who has low credibility, who is not a truth teller, who is not sincere, who is not cooperative in the face-to-face evaluation, who is not with you in your purpose of getting to the truth of the matter. In other words, you have an examinee who is not sincere and who is not credible. What should you do? Let me ask you, what should you do? Should you spend hours and hours in the face-to-face evaluation coming up with data that's not truthful, coming up with physical examination findings that are not accurate, coming up with limitations to activities of daily living that have no basis in fact or truth? Should you spend hours in the face-to-face evaluation when the examinee is not credible? Well, I invite you to go ahead and do that and waste all the time that you choose to waste. But for the rest of us, because time is of the essence in these evaluations, because so few evaluations now qualify for ML 104, most are qualifying for ML 103 and even ML 102, and even in those cases that involve an ML 104, we're rarely getting paid for our report preparation time, so the evaluation has to change. One of the things that changes has to deal with your face-to-face time when you're confronted with an examinee who has low credibility. When the examinee is determined by you to have low credibility, I'm suggesting that you shorten the face-to-face evaluation to the 20-minute time mark and quickly get in and get out of the evaluation and provide your opinions and conclusions based on an examinee who has low credibility. Now, in other programs related to permanent impairment and related to apportionment, I've talked about actual cases wherein the judge threw out permanent impairment ratings and where the judge threw out alternative impairment ratings under Alvarez and Guzman when the doctor stated within the body of his report that he did not assess the examinee to have good credibility. So in cases where the examinee has low credibility, the evaluation is over. And you can comfortably terminate the evaluation and provide your opinions and conclusions against industrial causation, for no permanent impairment, or for high levels of apportionment due to other factors, and quickly produce your report and preserve your hourly rate when indeed the examinee, in your opinion, is assessed to have low credibility. So the credibility assessment is more important now than even ever before. And I want to share with you today some practical suggestions that you can implement immediately in your very next evaluation in assessing your own examinee's credibility. And these are some tips and techniques that are well-based in criminal and forensic interviewing techniques, and I'm going to share with you some of those today. Now, when it comes to assessing our examinee credibility, it seems that of all the techniques and of all the knowledge that's been gained over the years, still accurately discriminating truth tellers from liars is difficult. But it seems that the more cues and clues you can ascertain from your interviewee, the better the discrimination is between truth tellers and liars. So you need to become attuned and aware of both verbal and nonverbal cues to deception. Now, it seems that lay people and professionals do not differ greatly in their ability to discriminate between truth tellers and liars. So a lay person is just about as good as a police officer, as a customs officer, as a judge, as a law enforcement officer at detecting deception based upon limited cues, based upon either nonverbal cues or based upon verbal cues. Well, in this program, we're going to spend some time discussing both nonverbal and verbal cues to deception. And by combining these two types of cues and clues to deception, you can quickly and accurately discriminate along with the best polygraphers and the best forensic interviewers in determining whether your examinee is a truth teller or is something less than a truth teller, if you know what I mean. Okay, so in today's discussion, I've provided several materials for you. I have a couple of studies that we're going to be referring to as we go through today the nonverbal cues to deception. So I'll give you a couple minutes to go ahead and assemble those materials, and I'll come back with you here in just a few moments with the materials myself, and we'll continue with today's discussion on the new era face-to-face evaluation. And today we're specifically discussing the quick assessment of the examinee's credibility in the face-to-face evaluation. So I'll be back with you here in just a very few moments. Okay, I'm back with you now, and have a couple of studies to go along with today's material. I hope you've taken the time to retrieve these studies so that you can lay your own eyes on the topics that I want to share with you today. And I have with me here today a couple of different studies. One is entitled Lying in Everyday Life. And this is an older study. This is from 1999, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. I want to share with you a couple of excerpts from this fascinating study. And then I have a newer study published in 2007 in the journal Psychology, Public Policy, and Law. And this has to do with moderators of nonverbal indicators of deception. So today we're going to be talking about nonverbal indicators of deception, and in our next session we're going to talk about verbal indicators of deception. So between the two sessions, today and our next session, we're going to have many cues and many clues, both verbally and nonverbally, that we can use to arrive at an assessment as to our examinee's level of credibility. Now, let me read a couple of interesting facts from this study here entitled Lying in Everyday Life. And this is a study out of Cornell University, which is in Cornell University Medical College, which I believe is in New York. Okay? So what is a lie? What is a lie? We're going to be faced with examinees in our qualified medical evaluation, and this may come as new news to some of you, but believe it or not, we are going to be faced with examinees who lie to us right to our face in the face-to-face evaluation during the qualified medical evaluation. And what I'm suggesting is when you encounter such an examinee, the evaluation is over. And you can confidently and comfortably go ahead and prepare your opinions and conclusions based upon an examinee's low credibility. And your opinions and conclusions will be upheld. The precedent for upholding QME opinions and conclusions based on low examinee credibility is already established in case law. So we will be faced with examinees who attempt to deceive us into believing that their condition is worse than it actually is so that they may obtain workers' compensation benefits, okay? In fact, the AMA guides contain several studies which indicate to us just this fact, and these are described at the end of Chapter 18 of the AMA guides. Now, referring to this study, Lying in Everyday Life, what is a lie? Well, they tell us that a lie occurs anytime you intentionally try to mislead someone, such as the qualified medical evaluator. Both the intent to deceive and the actual deception must occur. Attempts to mislead can be both verbal and nonverbal. So, trust me, if you have not already encountered this, you will encounter examinees who will attempt to mislead you. How will they attempt to mislead you? They'll attempt to mislead you by trying to convince you, number one, that they suffered an industrial injury when they did not. In other words, they will attempt to convince you to opine for industrial causation in those cases that involve a denied claim. Examinees will attempt to convince you that they have less capacity on physical examination than they actually do, so that they can qualify for permanent impairment benefits under workers' compensation. Examinees will attempt to mislead you into believing that their limitations with activities of daily living are greater than they actually are, again for the same reason, in order to qualify for permanent impairment benefits under workers' compensation. And these are just a few examples, but you need to be comfortable with the concept that some examinees may attempt to mislead you through the use of verbal and nonverbal lies. So some of the conclusions of this study are that, number one, lying is a fact of everyday social life. And you don't deny this, you don't dispute this, I'm sure. In fact, every time someone asks you how you doing and you respond fine, many times, 8 times out of 10, those are lies, correct? And yet we all do this. Lying is a fact of everyday life in social life for a variety of reasons. Lying is purposely designed to foster a false impression. And one thing that you need to be aware of is that examinees in the workers' compensation system attempt to create a false impression for us. They're quite concerned in their words and their actions and behaviors with impression management. Examinees in the workers' compensation want to create in us a favorable impression, much of which may actually be a false impression. Every social interaction is an opportunity to tell a lie. Similarly, every qualified medical evaluation is an opportunity for examinees to attempt to mislead the qualified medical evaluator. Now, I want to share with you 4 different types of lies that we may encounter in the qualified medical evaluation as those are described in this study, Lying in Everyday Life. Number 1, and these are the more rare types of lies, these are known as the outright lies. Outright lies are total falsehoods. Those are lies in which the information conveyed is completely different from or contradictory to the truth. For example, I told my mother that I did not drink beer at college. This could be a completely contradictory statement, completely contradictory to the truth. And I recently had an examinee who told me what I construed to be an outright lie. He told me that he had no prior motor vehicle accident collisions, and he had no prior injury to the body part that was involved with the industrial injury, which in this case happened to be the left shoulder. Well, interestingly, the medical records that I received described a motor vehicle accident just 5 years prior. And the medical records from that auto accident revealed that he suffered a severe injury to the left shoulder, an injury that resulted in a ongoing diagnosis of chronic pain and an ongoing and active prescription for painkillers and anti-inflammatory medications for the left shoulder. And the examinee specifically told me and specifically denied two things: prior motor vehicle accident and prior injury to the same body part involved with the current claim for industrial injury. That was an outright lie. Another type of lie is the exaggeration. Now, these are going to be more common than outright lies. It's the rare examinee who's going to come and give you an outright lie, because outright lies generally contain information that can be verified by the examiner. So examinees know this, and so they steer away from outright lies, preferring more to use some of these other more subtle types of lies. So the exaggeration is a lie in which liars overstate the facts or convey an impression that exceeds the truth. Now, this is one that you're going to encounter all the time. So, for example, a person could exaggerate how sorry they were to be late, when in actual fact, they were not very sorry at all. Now, in the QME setting, we're going to have examinees that attempt to exaggerate their symptoms. They're going to attempt to exaggerate their limitations with activities of daily living. They're going to attempt to exaggerate their incapacity for physical examination procedures. So you'll hear examinees tell you that their pain is worse than it actually is. They'll tell you that their limitations to activities of daily living are more limited than they actually are. And with these types of examinees, these exaggerations are very easy to quickly spot in the qualified medical evaluation, because examinees will tell you and will exaggerate limitations that are not consistent with what's truly objective. So, for example, examinees will tell you that with activities of daily living, such as with travel activities, they have difficulty in driving, and they have to get out of their car every 30 minutes to take a rest due to lower back pain, let's just say, for example. Well, that's a totally subjective statement, when on a more objective basis, you could simply follow that up by asking the examinee, did you drive yourself to today's evaluation? And asking them, how long did it take you to get to today's evaluation? And if the examinee tells you that it took them 45 minutes to get to today's evaluation, and that they drove themselves to the evaluation, you will spot this exaggeration in the description of their limitations to activities of daily living. Next type of lie is the subtle lie, and these are very, very common. And these include or involve lying by evading or omitting relevant details, and by telling literal truths that are designed to mislead. Also includes behavioral or nonverbal lies. So, for example, a person says, he and I discussed sexual acts that I had performed, but he assumed that they had been performed with a woman. And the omission is, or the misleading is, that the sexual acts had actually been performed with a man. In the QME setting, this includes omission and misleading, including information about prior medical conditions, prior same or similar symptoms, or prior same or similar injuries to same body parts. And the key component of these subtle lies involves the omission. The omission. I once took a course in lying, and the whole philosophy of the particular course that I took was that the lies are to be found in the omissions. People conveniently omit information that they don't want you to know, information that would cause you to conclude differently from the impression that they're attempting to convey to you. So those are three types of lies: the outright lies, the exaggeration lies, and the more subtle lies. Well, finally, the fourth type of lie that you're going to encounter in the qualified medical evaluation has to do with the feelings lies. These are lies that relate to feelings and or emotions. These are lies about affects, emotions, opinions, and evaluations, which most commonly includes feigning feelings and appraisals that are more positive or less negative than they actually are, as well as the converse, which is feigning less positivity and feigning more negativity. So, for example, the statement, "I told her that her muffins were the best ever," is an example of feigning more positivity than perhaps the muffin or the taste of the muffins actually warranted. Now, this is quite important. According to this study, Lies in Everyday Life, the most common type of lie that we will encounter in everyday life, and in my opinion, also in the qualified medical evaluation, are exactly these types of feeling, affect, emotional lies, where examinees feign, pretend either excess positivity or they feign, of course, excess negativity. Excess negativity, of course, would be exaggerating their condition and attempting to portray the condition as worse than it actually is. So, for example, as relates to the history in the face-to-face evaluation, this will involve examinees exaggerating the extent of their injury and their subsequent suffering. So they take on a tone that's more negative than it actually is, and these are just examples, and exaggerating the extent to which medical treatment has helped them so far. So, for example, they may say things, even though they're not completely well, even though they've not returned to a pre-injury condition, they feign that the medical treatment has greatly helped them by saying things, for example, "The medical treatment has brought me to this point, or else I would be much worse." And they feign positivity related to the medical treatment in order to create an impression more positive than it actually is. The true message is that the medical treatment has failed to bring them to a pre-injury condition, and as a result they're left with permanent impairment, but they feign positivity by reporting positive responses to the medical treatment that they had. And these are just simple examples. I'm sure you will encounter many similar and even different examples in your evaluations face-to-face. Okay? Now, turning to our next study, the moderators of nonverbal indicators of deception. This is a fascinating study because it tells us some of the nonverbal indicators that we are to be aware of in the face-to-face evaluation with our examinee, and these are nonverbal indicators that are cues and clues to deception. Now, it's important that you realize that the processes involved in telling a truthful statement are different from the processes involved in telling a simulated statement, a fabricated statement, an imagined statement. telling the truth involves different mental, emotional, and cognitive processes than telling fabricated half-truths, mistruths, omissions, outright lies, etc. And we can exploit the differences in these processes to help us discriminate between truth tellers and liars. And the first step in being able to discriminate between truth tellers and liars is to become aware of these nonverbal cues to deception. Now, when it comes to deception, there's a couple of different theories. There's 4 different theories described in this study as to explain why the behavior of truth tellers and liars differ. So let's talk about some of these theories, and then we'll talk about how the nonverbal indicators will vary based upon whether the examinee is a truth teller compared to an examinee who is not a truth teller. Okay? So, first of all, when we talk about nonverbal behaviors, what are some of the nonverbal behaviors that we can ascertain in the face-to-face evaluation? Well, the nonverbal behaviors that I want you to start to focus on involve 2 parts of the body. Number 1 involves the head, and then number 2 involves all the parts of the body below the head, including the arms and including the legs. So, for example, nonverbal behaviors visible in the head and neck region include number 1, eye blinks, number 2, eye contact, number 3, gaze aversion, number 4, head movements, number 5, nodding, and number 6, smiling. So these are all behaviors that can be observed from the neck up. Nonverbal behaviors that are visible in the body area include adapters. Adapters is a word used to define behaviors that your examinee will use to help them adapt or help them accommodate to the situation or to help them become more comfortable in the situation. So things that people do as adapters is they will rub their chin, they will stroke their beard or comb their mustache, or some people will pull on their earlobe, or women may twirl their hair. These types of behaviors, these are nonverbal behaviors known as adapters, which suggest that the examinee is attempting to pacify themselves, is attempting to make themselves more at ease in the situation. So you need to become aware of these different types of adapters. Number 2, hand movements. Number 3 is illustrators. Illustrators, again, are hand movements designed to illustrate the details that the examinee is talking about. For example, details relating to directions. They may use illustrators such as pointing to the right to indicate right, or pointing to the back to indicate that you take a U-turn and go back a quarter mile. And these types of movements are known as illustrators. Foot and leg movements and postural shifts. Now, in order to make this simple for you, I want to limit our focus in the qualified medical evaluation to the hand movements and to the foot and leg movements as far as the nonverbal behaviors for below the neck in the body region. Also, in this study, they talk about what are known as paraverbal indicators. So we have verbal indicators of deceit, nonverbal indicators of deceit, and we have what are known as paraverbals. And I just want to share with you a couple of paraverbals, even though we won't talk much about them. Paraverbals are aspects of behavior that accompany speech, such as the pitch of the speech or the tone of the speech, such as pauses or delays in speech, and such as speech errors or speech mistakes in explaining or in responding to questions. Most significant for us are going to involve the pauses and delays. Many times you'll notice that an examinee, when faced with an unexpected question, will have a significant pause or a delay in responding to the question as they cognitively ramp up in constructing their deceitful response to the question. So that's a paraverbal indicator of deceit. For our discussion today, we're going to focus on the nonverbal indicators of deceit. Now, there's 4 theories to explain behavioral differences between truth tellers and liars that we can observe in the face-to-face evaluation. So the first theory has to do with emotions and affect, and specifically has to do with the arousal level of the examinee. Now, in our last discussion, we talked about how to get the examinee calm and comfortable and relaxed in the face-to-face evaluation. And even if you go through that procedure, you're going to find that the examinees in the workers' compensation system come to the evaluation in an aroused state. I once had an examinee, believe it or not, who maneuvered himself from straight in front of me in the face-to-face evaluation, progressively moving around me circumferentially, till at one point finally he was behind me, leaning on the wall, and he was observed to be sweating profusely and was quite aroused and was quite uncomfortable. Now that's the exceptional examinee, but you're going to notice that your examinees are aroused when they arrive at the face-to-face evaluation. When the examinee is aroused, certain processes, certain autonomic nervous system processes take place that are beyond conscious control of the examinee. So in the arousal theory tells us that lying is associated with physiologic arousal. And this is the entire basis for the polygraph test. Polygraph pick up autonomic responses. So the polygraph testing is based upon the arousal theory. So lying is associated with physiologic arousal, including autonomic responses. And these responses are rarely subject to control, and therefore may provide relatively consistent cues to deception. So under the arousal theory, an examinee, because of their high state of arousal and the autonomic nervous system activity that accompanies high states of arousal, this is an examinee who you will observe to have higher than average, higher than normal rate of blinking. Blinking is an autonomic nervous system activity. This is an examinee who will have higher than normal amounts of head movements. This is an examinee who you will observe to do a higher than usual amount or a greater frequency of nodding in the face-to-face evaluation. In the body region, you'll notice an increased use of adapters by these examinees in the face-to-face evaluation, increased use of adapters. And these types of behaviors in an attempt to pacify or make themselves more comfortable, an increased use in hand movements, and an increase in foot and leg movements, all of which are under autonomic nervous system control, and so are largely uncontrollable by the examinee. Isn't that fascinating? These are movements that give the examinee's arousal level away and indicate that perhaps the examinee may be less than completely forthcoming with you in their responses to your specific questions. Okay, so that's the arousal theory. Number 2 is the fear or guilt theory. This again has to do with emotions and affect. It seems that examinees have conflicting emotions. They have some level of fear of being caught lying, and they also have some guilty feelings for engaging in lying. These are emotions that are felt on the emotional subconscious level. They have feelings of fear and they have feelings of guilt. Now, feelings of fear are highest When the liar expects the punishment for being found to be lying to be severe, when they assess the punishment to be severe, they're going to have an increased sensation of fear. Number two, when the liar has not practiced or rehearsed the lie before, they're going to have increased feelings of fear. When the target is expected to be suspicious, such as the examiner, when the examiner forwards a suspicious attitude, this will heighten the fear experienced by the examinee. And this is probably what motivated the one particular examinee to walk all the way around behind me so as he did not have to directly face and confront me. Now, fear can often manifest as withdrawal or orientation away from the examiner, and is characterized by a decreased use in illustrators in the hands. It's characterized by an increase in the number of blinks, but a decrease in the amount of eye contact between the examinee and the examiner. So in this case, you're going to notice that the examinee fails to be able to sustain eye contact with you as the examiner. The examinee will have an increase in gaze aversion, increase above what you would consider to be normal gaze aversion. They will have increased head movements, decreased nodding, and decreased smiles. They will have an increase in the number of adapters or comforting types of behaviors. They will have an increase in the number of hand movements and also an increase in the number of foot and leg movements, most again of which are generated by the autonomic nervous system, which are beyond the conscious control of the examinee. So you want to start to become aware of the nonverbal indicators in the head and in the body region. Now, according to this study, the nonverbal indicators in the body region are less subject to control, in other words, less subject to conscious override control, than are the nonverbal behaviors in the head, neck, and face, especially when dealing with motivated or when dealing with experienced liars. It seems that experienced liars and motivated liars seem better able to control the nonverbal cues in the head, neck, and face, but less able to control the nonverbal indicators in the remainder of the body region. So, according to this study, it's the nonverbal indicators in the body region that are the more powerful indicators of cues of deception than are the nonverbal indicators in the head, neck, and face. Okay? Now, another theory that explains the differences in behavior between truth tellers and liars has to do with attempted control. Attempted control. And according to this study, liars have an idea, as do we all actually, of the behavior displays, presumably raising skepticism about his or her own credibility in the receiver, and therefore, liars attempt to control the verbal and nonverbal communication channels to create a credible demeanor. So, when an examinee knows that they're in a high state of arousal, they attempt to control their behavior. When they are feeling sensations of fear and are feeling sensations of guilt, they attempt to control their behavior so as to not give away cues to deception. But many times it's this attempt to control, this attempt to override these normal subconscious behaviors that gives the liar away. Therefore, liars will try to display behaviors opposite to those that people believe give a lie away. So under the attempted control theory, this is the type of examinee that engages in prolonged eye contact with the examiner because they believe that lack of eye contact is a behavior that gives a traditional liar away. These types of liars will have an increase, they will have a decrease in gaze aversion. Because they believe that averting their gaze from you is a cue to deception among all liars. In other words, this is due to their perception of beliefs, of their own beliefs, about what constitutes a lie and what behaviors liars employ, and therefore they attempt to behave in manners opposite to the way that they believe liars should behave. So they will engage in prolonged eye contact and prolonged gaze with no gaze aversion. They will have an decreased head movements. They will have decreased use of adapters. They will have decreased hand movements. They will have decreased foot and leg movements because they believe that all these movements are movements that would give away their lie. So persons who are attempting to control their behavior tend to appear somewhat stiff, tend to appear somewhat rigid, because they're attempting to over-control behaviors that would otherwise give away cues and clues to deception. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that fascinating? So the point is, these theories, while they're described as separate, distinct theories, many of these processes coexist and interact simultaneously. So the take-home message for us as qualified medical evaluators is simply to become aware of these nonverbal indicators in the head, neck, and face, and in the body, and look for deviations from what you would consider to be normal, regular, calm, relaxed behavior. Any deviation from normal, regular, calm, relaxed behavior could be a cue, a nonverbal cue to deception. Okay? And then finally, and this is fascinating, this is the fourth theory that explains the differences between truth tellers and liars, the differences in behavior, nonverbal behaviors between truth tellers and liars, has to do with cognitive load. It seems that lying imposes a tremendous cognitive load on the deceiver. And we can exploit this cognitive load, and this cognitive load makes it difficult for them to perform well in other tasks while they're attempting to construe their lie, because their mind and their resources are so consumed with fabricating their deception. So, with regards to cognitive load, some researchers have argued that delivering a deceptive message requires a greater cognitive effort than telling the truth because of higher processing capacity demands. This may be particularly relevant in an interrogation or under cross-examination, where a respondent, such as a suspect, a defendant, or a witness, or an examinee in the workers' compensation system, is confronted with an unexpected question. Here, a respondent may have to decide whether or not to lie in response to the particular question, presumably depending on whether or not the information sought can be verified independently. So if the examinee believes that the information that the qualified medical evaluator is seeking cannot be verified independently, the examinee may then decide to go ahead and lie. This decision process may lead to a delay in responding and an increase in pauses, and those are the paraverbal cues that we referred to earlier. So in response to an unexpected question, the cognitive load in producing a deceptive message overwhelms and overloads the examinee, and they need time to gather their resources. This is manifest as pauses and delays. So they tell us that construction of complex lies taxes working memory when coming up with a sound alibi. Liars have to simultaneously, number one, plan what they are saying, two, attempt not to contradict themselves or contradict the knowledge of the examiner. And when I gave you an example earlier of the examinee who told me he had no prior motor vehicle accident and no prior injury to the same or similar body part, he was contradicting the knowledge that I had already gained from the medical records. So they have to attempt not to contradict themselves or the knowledge of the examiner. Number 3, they have to observe the listener's reactions while at the same time attempting to control their nonverbal behavior. Therefore, considering these multiple demands, so that's a lot, so considering these multiple demands, it should be no surprise that liars appear to think hard. They appear to think hard, and this thinking hard may actually give them away. They conclude by telling us that attempting to regulate one's behavior is assumed to tax or usurp cognitive resources. When cognitively occupied in constructing a lie, in other words, when the examinee is cognitively busy, the ability to control and regulate nonverbal behaviors decreases, and so eye contact, as well as other nonverbal indicators, such as illustrators, should also decrease. Okay? So the nonverbal indicators that you would consider to be a part of normal communication would decrease because the examinee is cognitively busy and is cognitively taxing their resources, that they lose the ability to control their behavior. So under the cognitive load theory, we would expect to see an examinee have decreased amount of eye contact because they lose the ability to regulate their behavior and what they believe eye contact indicates in terms of telling the truth and telling lies. They would have an increase in gaze aversion. They would have a decrease in head movements. They would have a decrease in smiles as they lose the ability to regulate the behavior of their body, their nonverbal behaviors. They will have a decrease in the use of adapters, a decreased use in hand movements, a decrease in the use of illustrators, and a decrease in foot and leg movements. And these are examinees who, because they're so cognitively busy, appear to be quite stiff, quite rigid, and quite immobile as they fail to be able to control their behavior and they fail to be able to create what they would consider to be a positive impression in the eyes of the examiner, which is us, the qualified medical evaluator. So doctors, as you go through the difficult decision-making process involved in providing your opinions and conclusions in your qualified medical evaluation report, you're going to be dealing with difficult financial issues such as AOE-COE, such as permanent impairment, the presence and extent of permanent impairment, and such as apportionment of the permanent impairment. And of course, examinees are going to come to the evaluation to attempt to convince you that their injury qualifies as an industrial injury, and therefore you need to opine AOE-COE. And these are some behaviors that can tip you to a deceptive examinee. Examinees will come to the face-to-face evaluation to convince you that their condition is more negative than it actually is, so that they can obtain higher permanent disability benefits. And these are some body behaviors, nonverbal indicators, that you can rely on to conclude that the examinee is not credible. Finally, examinees will come to the qualified medical evaluation to convince you that their permanent impairment is due 100% to the industrial injury. Like the examinee that I told you about, he completely forgot about a prior motor vehicle accident because he was attempting to deceive me into believing that the entirety of his problems were due to the industrial injury, but his nonverbal cues and his nonverbal behaviors indicated that that story might not have been completely true. So these are some nonverbal indicators of deception that you can rely on comfortably and confidently in arriving at your opinions and conclusions. Now, in our next session, we're going to go over verbal cues to deception. It's interesting because once the examinee begins speaking, we can quickly pick up on verbal cues, the words that they say, and the construction of their sentences to arrive quickly at a conclusion as to whether the examinee is credible or whether the examinee is not credible. And this allows us to quickly form our opinions and conclusions and quickly get out of the evaluation in the case of an examinee who is not completely credible. So doctors, I hope this helps you. We're talking about the new era, face-to-face evaluation, and these are certainly new times, and the times certainly are changing quickly. And it's important now more than ever that we be targeted, focused, and directed in exactly what it is that we're trying to do. And for examinees who are not credible, those are examinations and evaluations that we want to quickly terminate and conclude and get out of and get done with just as quickly as we can. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's video. Look forward to being with you on future videos as well. And for now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter, wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.